Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us both in person and online. I'm Jenna Ben-Yehuda, Executive Vice President here at the Atlantic Council. We're really delighted to be with all of you today to kick off an exciting conversation with ABB Chairman Peter Voser on innovating for the electrified economy. Today's fireside chat is set to explore how technological innovation is really helping to bridge the gap between energy supply and demand, and spotlight how firms are supporting the imperative of energy security and really working together to advance broader economic growth and sustainability goals. Amidst this really rapidly changing global energy landscape, ensuring an affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy future is truly so vital. And at the Atlantic Council, our Global Energy Center is really committed to work that strengthens policy pathways needed to achieve this future. The importance of this work has only grown against the backdrop of the rapid advancement of electrification and artificial intelligence, which are set to push electricity demand growth to its fastest rate in over a decade. And as global policymakers and industry leaders look to meet this moment and ensure that energy supplies are meeting the growing demand, a wave of technological solutions are emerging to help relieve systemic pressures. So looking ahead, companies like ABB are set to play an increasingly important role in ensuring that these innovations and technological advancements really help lay the foundation for a secure and sustainable energy future. And with that in mind, it's really my privilege to welcome ABB's chairman, Peter Voser. Peter and I have had a couple of minutes to chat. He's had a fascinating career all around the world, has seen so much tremendous change. And then maybe even now, despite all of that, this moment of geopolitical contest, I think could possibly take the cake for its complexity and urgency in this moment. So you're in for a treat. He's an accomplished global industry leader, previously serving as Chief Executive Officer of Shell, and has lots of good stories from that time you can ask him about. Over the course of his long career, Peter's been really at the forefront of advancing energy security and enabling durable economic growth for communities worldwide. And as chairman of ABB, he's steered the company with a clear focus on these issues, championing their role as a technology solutions provider to build a more efficient, reliable, and affordable energy system. Leaders like Peter are really critical to ensuring that the pressure that we're all experiencing on the energy system grows and that we're able to deploy innovation, but also capital and policy as effectively as possible. So Peter, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be with us here today. Today's conversation will be moderated by Ben Gieman of Axios. Ben, thank you so much for guiding what I know will be a really insightful conversation. Before I turn the floor over to Peter and Ben for our fireside chat, I want to remind you that you can find us online today, and if you'd like audience Q&A here and online, you can submit a question at askac.org. And with that, over to the both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peter, thanks for joining me here for this conversation. I think the comments about rapid change are a fantastic place to start. And with some level setting as well. I think everybody in the audience and online has probably heard about the fact that data centers, especially these hyperscale AI data centers, are driving power demand growth. That narrative is true, but I think it's also quite incomplete. What else is sort of driving the electrification picture?
I think the world is being electrified, and it's not just data centers, but you can go into transport, you can go into industry. You will find actually the entire energy system is being kind of reconfigured. It still has the normal the pillars, which is the fossil side, but it has also, which will be the upstream, then the gas side, it has got the renewables, etc. And it is very clear that the energy system is growing, but the electrification of it is actually growing 9 times faster than all the rest. And yes, data centers and utilities are key to that, and that's double-digit growth. But I think we are only at the beginning where we can see now how the electrification actually goes through. And I think this also is for companies like ABB is absolutely crucial in terms of innovating energy kind of efficient products, energy saving products, smart products, because we need to deal with the flow of the electrons, etc. So it is very clear that electrification over the next 20 30 years will be a key player in the energy system. So.
Definitely, and I'm glad you mentioned efficiency, because so much of the conversation here in the United States is about what are the sort of upstream. I don't know if upstream can be applied to renewables, but you get the picture. It's what is going to supply our growing power needs. Will it be gas? Will it be maintaining coal for longer than we thought? Will it be new build nuclear, which is harder to get off the ground, but maybe coming to fruition more than it used to? All of that said, that's all just part of the equation. Is there enough discussion of efficiency?
I think there is not enough. And what is in a way disturbing is that on the efficiency side, most of the products and the technology solutions are actually available. And therefore, it needs investments. It needs, therefore, for industries, mainly industries, actually to take and bring forward some of the energy savings type of investments. Let me give you an example. 29% of the electricity consumption in the US is driven by electric motors. These are old motors, most of them. If you actually just replace them with the new ones and bring some drive control systems with it also into the investment, you would actually increase the capacity of the grid. So you would save 10%. Now 10% are kind of, 35 nuclear plants. What you are saving, and you don't need permitting, you don't need big infrastructure projects, you need nothing. It's just what is available, implemented. For the customers of ours, they would save 30-40% of energy. Therefore, there is a cost element, which is a benefit to them. And the grid would really benefit by just adding 10% capacity without doing any major investments. And these type of things, they are available, but we just can't get through at the moment. Now, is that driven by uncertainty on the policy side, or is it the uncertainty of the economy because nobody wants to invest, or the investment cycle is not right? We can have a debate about that, but I think the solutions are there.
I would imagine it varies. Both the barriers and the sort of solution sets must vary by geographic location. Are there any particular places that you see the biggest opportunities, or perhaps largest untapped potential gains in efficiency, especially on the industrial side that you were referring to, but also on the utility side?
Yeah, I think this country has a huge potential on this, the US. I would still think also in Europe, there is quite a bit of potential there. And as we are all talking, here in the US, you talk about the independence of your energy supply. In Europe, it's linked to security as well. We want also to have affordable and independent supplies. And therefore, I think it needs these type of investments in both countries or regions. And I think there is huge potential there. So I would highlight those two. The one which if you like it or not, who has actually put a lot of emphasis on these type of things is actually China. So they're actually further advanced in the way they actually have their 5-year plans and how they have embedded energy efficiency into their plans. So they're more further advanced. If you take ASEAN, certain potential, but not as big as Europe and the US.
You mentioned energy security. I think the kind of connective tissue between electrification and energy security is a really fascinating conversation. I mean, zooming, I suppose, way out, there's just a much greater focus on energy security these days because of Russia's attack on Ukraine, because of some of the trade friction that we're seeing. How can electrification kind of fit into this growing need for energy security that we're seeing?
I think it plays a vital role. So let's maybe use Europe as an example. Obviously, with the war in Russia, Ukraine, it became very obvious that Europe needs to find different solutions than Russian gas. Well, therefore, we have some higher LNG imports. That's one thing. But on the other side, we have not a problem of scarcity of resources to produce electricity. What we have in Europe is actually the investments so that the available potential of renewables, for example, or of gas plants can be developed. And then actually in a smart way, you need to manage them, the flow of electricity. So in Europe, if I summarize it this way, it's not a scarcity, it is actually an affordability, and it's the investment side which needs to work. If you go to the US, it's the upstream side, I think, it's pretty clear. It's going to be gas, it's still coal, it is somewhat renewables. But then, quite clearly, when you go further down, that's where incentives for investments need actually to be coming in. And I think that should be then the focus also of the energy policy in this country quite clearly. A lot is talked all the time about electrification of transport, EVs, etc., etc. And everybody is now talking that this gives us a slowdown in renewables. It gives us a slowdown in the application of EVs for transport, etc. And hence, the overall electricity balance, demand and supply, therefore will be kind of easier to kind of manage. That's not going to be the case because electrification demand is going so fast up in many other areas like data centers, etc. So I think we should be very clear that on the upstream side we need every resource being developed and then in a smart way actually then build infrastructure, build smart grids, do actually the right smart infrastructure in buildings like commercial buildings, private buildings, in order to take full advantage of energy saving opportunities.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the sort of some of these seismic changes we've been seeing in U.S. policy, which I also think sort of have ripple effects worldwide. But staying in the U.S. for a moment, it seems to me that while some of these policy changes are quite significant, it's not obvious that they affect the overall underlying trend of electrification. I mean, you've been investing, ABB's been investing heavily in the U.S., and you see both the electrification, but also the industrial market is key. Has your U.S. posture or plan changed at all, given the kind of changes we've been seeing in federal policy?
Obviously, we are watching this. We would have preferred that some of the incentives stayed in place. They have now been removed. But what we don't see is actually that the underlying trend is changing. Mm-hmm. So the US, which is the biggest market for ABB, is still the fastest growing market on the electrification side in the world. We are struggling to put enough capacity on the ground in order to deliver what is really needed to supply the entire market. So, and I think this has to do with what I said before, the 9-fold higher growth rate of the electrification consumption here in this country or in the world. Therefore, we are always in a catch-up mode. Mm-hmm. Then we have got, as we all know, the grids here in the US there are 3 of them. They are not connected. They're very old. They need major investments.
Sorry, what do you mean by there are 3 of them?
They are not that well connected. But if you are in Europe, for example, the system is actually entirely connected, which gives you much more opportunities also to play the supply and the demand balance. Mm-hmm. That's much more difficult here in the US because I think you call it West, East and Texas, I guess.
Yeah, Texas is kind of an island.
It's an island in that sense. But therefore, to do peak demand planning and steering is much more difficult in the US. And I think that's where we need clear investment strategies. And obviously, if you add the renewables, you need also, you are not managing anymore the high voltage, which you are transporting. You're actually managing medium voltage and low voltage because you have to bring these flows of solar, wind into the energy system. And I think this is a great potential here in the US, which kind of was somewhat slowed down, but the underlying trend is still there. I think clean energy increased kind of 60%, if I'm not mistaken, in 25, and therefore investments are still ongoing. Is sustainability the major driver, or is it just a form of energy which is easier available for consumption? I think it's most probably more the second one, but which has a positive effect on the first one. So I think this is a clear trend going forward. I think what is important is permitting should be much easier. That's for the infrastructure investments. I think there are some policies being put in place by the current administration to facilitate this in a different way. And therefore, I think the outlook for the US in terms of products for the electrification, what we are serving as ABB, we still see as very strong. On top of it, you have data centers, which also give us a lot of demand in that sense. But then we can obviously also discuss what influence do data centers have in consumer pricing and availability of electricity. These are challenges which we need to deal with. So.
Definitely. I want to get back to data centers in a moment, but I think one thing that's crystal clear from your remarks is that the sort of grid needs are becoming vastly more complicated than they used to be, and this is going to require a lot of trained people, skilled people. How much are you concerned, or to what extent is the sort of workforce readiness a potential barrier to electrification? And please take that where you will, whether that's in the US, in Europe, China, other markets.
Let me start with saying to you that it's globally an enormous challenge, and therefore it's in the US, it's the same. So let's focus then on the US. I think we are going to miss a lot of skilled electric workers, for no better description. We are short of them. Given the growth which we just described over the next few years and what we are experiencing at the moment, we will be short of these type of skills which we need. And data center is just one of the drivers, but then you have got the high voltage transmission distribution lines and then the smart grids which we need to build. And therefore, I think there is an enormous challenge in the education system in the US. So as ABB, we are trying to help here. So we are working with certain universities in the US to push, let's say, the education, the skills education on electrification. As you may know, Switzerland is very much known for their vocational apprenticeship type of system which we have. We are bringing that into the US as well. We are running that already. And I think the objective here is quite clearly that the shortage of skills for the electrification of the country is such a kind of risk for us that we need to really work together in order to have a sufficient supply. Now, some people may say, but AI will eliminate some of these jobs. That's not going to be eliminated in this category, because we will need those specialists to actually build the electrical installations across the country. So that's quite key. I have to say, we are running such centers in Switzerland. So we have the right of the government to actually educate our own employees, apprenticeship. And we had a lot of ministers actually coming, secretaries coming from the US to look at the system as well. So there seems to be an interest on the government side to actually start to implement this also in the US. I know from 3 or 4 other Swiss companies who they are maybe in train construction, one in Salt Lake City. They also have started now to implement this vocational training because they're also suffering shortage of skills. And therefore, I think we all have to work together to overcome that hurdle, because it cannot be that because of missing skills, we cannot build out the electrification network. So.
Yeah, it seems like the needs are vast. I mean, your company alone, a very large company, but just ABB has, I believe, over 100,000 employees. So if you start to kind of replicate that scale across the electrification needs of the whole world, it does seem like a very major challenge.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, if you look at, for example, on the transmission lines globally, I think we will need 80 million kilometers. You can calculate the miles out of that on a global basis to install actually new transmission and distribution lines. Now, you just imagine that's kind of it's a huge number of kilometers or miles we have to do, and for that we need the necessary skills. So this is not just a US problem, this is a global problem, no doubt. So, and the demographics play a role. In some countries it's not a problem here, but if I take Europe, if I take Japan, if I take China, where you have got a very much aging population, then we are using 15 to 20% of the engineering skills in some countries over the next 10 to 15 years. I think it's around 50 million in the whole of Europe over the next 10 years. So that shows the magnitude of the challenge which we have at our hands.
Thank you. I do want to get to some questions soon, but I want to ask a few of my own first. I'm glad you mentioned AI. There's another context in which I'd like to bring it up. I mean, certainly a lot of the very public narrative and a lot of the sort of very large investment announcements we see virtually every day in the US at this point, you know, these very large figures in terms of new gigawatt scale data centers envisioned and the power needed to supply them. I also wonder, though, whether the flip side of that coin does not get enough attention. How do you see AI perhaps enabling some of the efficiency needs that you mentioned? And more broadly, how can AI help sort of integrate these new sources onto the grid in a more sort of seamless and effective way?
AI is going to be crucial in the industrial sense, but also in the electrification, so utility sense, because we can use AI to add to our smart products, which we already have on the electrification side. In the industrial space, exactly the same. I think the productivity and efficiency gains you can achieve by applying AI in either manufacturing lines or in components or products is enormous. And whilst AI has we have seen the development in what I call the B2C, so on the consumer side, that has been kind of very fast developing over the last 2-3 years. We are at the beginning on the B2B side. Mm-hmm. Most companies are still thinking through on how to apply this in their own company, in their own manufacturing space. So moving from today's manufacturing to advanced manufacturing, what that actually needs. So that's still to come. So for example, when you look at AI today, so a data center today, it's around 20-25% is used for AI in applications. So to use it really to further enhance your productivity, etc. And the rest is actually used for training. Mm-hmm. So it's building these models. So that at one stage this needs to switch. Because obviously the B2B side will develop this in a much bigger way, and therefore some of the capacity which we are using at the moment for training these models will then be in the application of it. ABB, we have roughly 60% of our products have software components in it, and most of them now have AI components in it. So that's the pace on how this is changing. Is it public AI, or is it actually just within the premise of an industrial player? It is more the second one than the first one. So these large language models or action models, whatever you want to call them, that's most probably not going to be the usage of it in the industrial side. It's much more the smaller, tailored ones for the industrial purposes. But the productivity gains are, I think I'm a little bit careful with percentages, but it is going to be well into the double digit from a productivity point of view. And then it will help you also to find easier solutions, new solutions, and it will help you on the R&D side, etc. So,
do you think AI itself could help change the sort of nature of the energy demands from AI data centers, in the sense of, one thing that I think is becoming a much more interesting conversation is the idea that it's perhaps too simplistic to think of these data centers as just 24/7, always on, big kind of energy hogs, right? How much potential do you see in the idea that data centers themselves, perhaps aided by AI, can actually behave more flexibly in their energy demand needs, and could that help to sort of mitigate some of these grid strains?
I think so the answer is simply yes. Mm-hmm. And I think we are working heavily on the innovation R&D side to bring in products which help to actually manage the electricity flow in different ways, also use less, help to kind of deal with the constant high demand you have, what you are describing. So I think there's a lot of innovation going into these things. Some of the products we already have, we implement. Some of the hyperscalers are working together with us to completely redesign the way data centers are built and are equipped from an electrification point of view. So there's huge potential there. So I think AI is not just causing the much higher demand on electricity and water, etc., and using land resources, etc. It has also the other side. It will be a clear area where we can develop new products and new software solutions, which we then can use to further optimize the electrification, because we have smart products, we have energy savings products. I mean, think about cooling. Is it air cooling, water cooling, liquid cooling? There's a lot going on there, and I think we are only at the beginning of this whole journey at this stage.
Absolutely. I think what you've just mentioned is one of the reasons why I tend to pay attention to a lot of different analyses, whether they're from academics or consultancies or what have you, about what the sort of power demand growth from AI is going to be. And obviously, directionally, it's all going in the same direction, but the uncertainty band is just gigantic,
yeah.
Right? And so
that's the fascinating thing in being in this business, because if you are a company which is driven by innovation, and we have thousands of software engineers, etc., and obviously they are going in at these innovations at full speed, and this gives you a lot of opportunities as well, which will give us a benefit for the overall energy system, but also for the climate, for sustainability purposes. So
absolutely. I want to leave some time for questions. Do we have any audience questions here? Yes, it looks like I think we've got some folks with microphones coming around.
Good afternoon. I want to ask it's kind of a basic question, and that is that with power comes responsibility, as you well know. And so as we evolve with the AI and the usage of it, and you being an industry leader, do you spend more time thinking about the morality of the things that you are able to accomplish, or concerning yourself with legal ramifications of what could have come to be as a result of your work?
Okay. So your question is driven around AI at the end. So let me maybe phrase it in this way. I think AI, or let's say the technology, I don't think the technology needs regulations, needs ethical kind of standards. What we need is regulation and ethical standards in the application of it. Because technology you cannot stop. But the way we apply it is extremely crucial, and it's important. And that's where ABB is at home, and that's where we do a lot in terms of the way we develop smart solutions for buildings, commercial or private, or for cities, etc. And we welcome regulations. We want to contribute to this one, and we have clearly Europe is further advanced in terms of thinking around AI norms, regulations, ethical behaviors, etc. We are fully subscribing to that and working also with authorities on this one. I think I would consider the US further behind on this one, maybe not as advanced as, for example, Europe. And I think we need. The ideal situation would be that we have got a global standard for all of this, but I have to say I'm too long in the business. I don't believe in those circumstances that we can agree on a global standard. I think we will face various standards across the world, driven also by cultural elements which are different from continent to continent or country to country. But as a company, we are very, very much behind regulations on this side. We welcome them, actually, and we hope through that we can deliver our part to society, but also have a level playing field that everybody complies to the same.
I'd love to actually piggyback off that question for a moment and ask about on climate change, right? I mean, there's so much interest right now in, is the world sort of pumping the brakes on some level on commitments to climate? To what extent do you see climate policy driving the pace of electrification, or is it something that depending, whether countries are very aggressive or, as I said, tapping the brakes a little bit, will that actually not materially affect the pace?
I think climate change is an element of it. We cannot say no to that. But I think at the end, it's going to be the reliability of the energy source and the price of the energy source which will drive the demand. And I think electrification clearly, or electrifying the world, has a lot of elements out of that in the demand structure at this stage. And as a side effect, quite clearly, maybe at the beginning it was a major driver, but I think we have passed that hurdle, and the underlying trend is still the same, despite the fact that some countries are maybe watering down some of the requirements on sustainability. Some others are still pushing it. I think that's, in my opinion, the demand is exactly the same. I have a very simple way of describing this. I think when you implement electrification and you bring your products, including software and AI, you are not just doing good for the planet, you are also doing actually good for costs, because the end consumer over time will pay less and will have a much more sustainable product. I think where I take some distance against the last few years, I think we have overdone it. We thought that the complexity of the energy system is actually much less, and therefore we can achieve in a much shorter time much more by moving to renewables, moving to electrification. I think the energy system is so complex that it takes time, and for the next few decades, if we like it or not, we will need all the elements. We will need renewables, we will need nuclear, we will need coal, we will need oil and gas in order to actually supply the world with the energies. Some of the components will actually be on a decreasing kind of trend, and that's okay. But just thinking that you can switch from one system to the other in 5 or 10 years is not going to work. So I think we need more time on that. But with all what I've seen now over the last 2-3 years, where maybe there was a certain slowdown, the underlying investments by companies and by governments for that matter, we haven't seen the big change actually. So it's still going positively. And for ABB, I mean, we are in automation and electrification. We are in the middle of delivering solutions for the longer term to society, which should be clearly on a sustainable basis, and we haven't changed our direction.
Thank you. Wanted to go from that sort of higher level to something a little bit more specific, which is that we have somebody asking, transformer shortages remain a bottleneck for electrification efforts globally. Has ABB seen this issue materialize, and what is ABB doing to expand capacity and cut lead times? And is there, as the last part of this question, is there a single policy change that would really sort of move the needle on that? Okay, now thanks for the question. Maybe the last part of the sentence, I would say no. There is not one little thing you can do and then it works, so that's not the case. I would take the transformer and change it in to the wider components issues, because it's not just transformers. But yes, there were clearly, with the fast build-out, for example, of data centers, etc., there were in some parts, there were some shortages. I think ABB in this country over the last 3 years has invested $500 million, which for an electrification company is quite a bit. So we are not in the tens of billions normally, so we are smaller.
But this year also, we already invested another 250 million here in these countries for manufacturing across actually most of these components which are needed. So I think we are adapting our capacity at the demand. And there is no doubt that the demand was growing much faster than our capacity was actually there. Now, given the fact that ABB produces locally what we sell locally, this means that the demand is growing so fast here in the US that we are investing much more here in the US, because we have for the last 30, 40 years, we have always produced locally what we sell locally. So all these tariff discussions for us are actually not that important because we are not affected by it. But we have, therefore, because the US is growing so fast in terms of electrical products, we have to invest here significantly. And therefore, with the data center kind of demand, etc., yes, we have longer lead times. But so far, I have to say, from an ABB perspective, as we reacted quite early, we do not actually face these bottlenecks like some of our competitors. So therefore, we are participating in that growth. But there is no one policy which changes this, because this is very simple. You need to invest and build. Yeah.
Definitely. Did we have another audience question here? Yes, we have another one right in the front here. Thank you.
You just said that we're going to need, a variety of energy sources. And one thing that I'm always wondering about is, are small nuclear reactors going to take off? Because the idea is great, having the reliability of a nuclear reactor with less risk or minimum risk. But I also feel like none has been built. So I don't know if you have any insight into, the different technologies, the newer technologies, which ones are the most exciting and in your mind, like realistic to play a big part.
No, thanks for the question. SMRs, I think they will be part of the equation, but I don't think the next 5 years. It will just take longer before the technology is as ready as it should be. So there are quite a number of startups, and especially for data centers, this would be an ideal solution. But I think this will not actually be the solving point for the next 5 to 7 or 8 years. I think, therefore, our view is much more that we are further optimizing actually the energy needs and usage of data centers at this stage. And then for the supply coming in, I think there quite clearly you will need, and I think in the US, if I'm not mistaken, it's 200 plus gas power plants which are now being planned. And I think for the shorter term, that's most probably the only bridging solution you have, together hopefully with some of the renewables development, and from a climate point of view, hopefully less coal. But I think we will need all these resources until the SMRs. You can now also talk about fusion technologies. That's even further down the road. I think hydrogen will be another one. But even in hydrogen, there were some expectations that this comes much earlier. I'm still of the opinion we are talking the 40s most probably at scale for hydrogen. So I think there is a lot of development on new technologies happening, but they just need time. When I was still at Shell, I always used the example when you want to change 1% of your energy system, it normally takes 20 years because it's so complex. Now, with new technologies, you can maybe bring that somewhat forward, but you will not bring it forward to 2 or 3 years. It just takes time. If you take the wind turbine, the first ones you had somewhere in the 80s. Now they are 100 times more better and stronger now, but it took us 30 years to get there. So some realism has to come into these discussions. It shouldn't stop us to invest in renewables, what we have today, but we should also be and specifically when we discuss it with politicians, we should set the right goals which can be achieved. So it's a little bit longer answer than SMRs, but I think for a gigawatt data center, most probably you will need some 4 SMRs, something like that. They will come, but I don't think this decade. It will take a little bit longer.
Yeah, my sense is that there's been a lot of hope that we'll start to see the first SMRs in the U.S. Perhaps 1 or 2 years before the end of this decade. So it sounds like you would not take that bet.
We take it when it comes, but I wouldn't put money on it at this stage, no.
Thank you. You were mentioning, speaking of timelines, we've got another question here that says many countries take 5 to 10 years to greenlight power lines and plants. How is ABB seeing issues related to permitting reform impact project timelines?
I think permitting reforms in the US, but also globally, is an absolute must. It is just a nightmare on how long it takes. And it's not just power lines, streetlight power lines. It is in general. And this is also, you asked the question early on, in kind of energy efficiency. This is the big advantage when you have energy, when you go after energy efficiency, because normally you don't need permitting there. Because actually changing motors and other technologies you already have with newer ones. So that's, I think that's why I'm a very strong proponent on actually doing much more on that side. But permitting is a real issue. And you see it, we operate in 100+ countries. And I can't kind of name you one where you don't have permitting problem. It is just everywhere the same. Maybe a little less in China, because there the direct democracy works downwards and is not that that distributed. There you don't have these problems, but even there it takes longer. But in the rest of the world, permitting is most probably the biggest obstacle which we have. So.
Are you optimistic at all that the sort of intense polarization in the U.S. can be overcome? It's very hard to agree on anything here, obviously.
My job is to run a business. And therefore, I take whatever is given to me, and then I optimize it. Let me put it this way. I think the most important thing for us in the business is kind of stable structure would be too much, but just give us a framework and then we will work with it. I think we have proven over the last 20, 30, 40 years that within the framework we can adjust, but we need at least some direction from a framework perspective. And I think as long as we get that, and you see this today, I think you have a lot of changes in the world, not just in the US, but in general, also in Europe, and it's the same in other countries. And as long as the kind of the long-term direction from a framework perspective is there, we normally can work, and we find solutions. And so I'm optimistic that we will actually get there. And some polarization from time to time, that's a fact of life and we have to live with it. Less would be nice, but that's normally not in my hands. Therefore, I don't lose sleep. I just take what I have and then I run. So I'm very pragmatic on this side. So.
Thank you. We've been pulling on a lot of different really interesting strands in this conversation. Unfortunately, our time is starting to run short. I'm wondering if you have some closing remarks to sort of tie up all these strands back into a fabric.
I think I would only do it this way. I think the world, therefore also the US, we have a great opportunity with all the new technologies to change the energy system for good. It will take time, but I think there should be no slowdown factor if possible. There should be enough opportunities to develop this so that we can actually get energy in whatever form it is. Electrification was probably the highest the highest part will be electrification to everybody, so that we can also take, maybe not in this country only, but in general in the world, that we can take everybody out of energy poverty and drive, let's say, the society in such a way that everybody can benefit for it. And there the energy system is extremely important because it's the nucleus which we have in our hands. And I'm optimistic that the demand will be there and that we as industries, we can deliver that. And I hope that the political side will give us the right frameworks to do this. But I'm optimistic there. I think it's a unique chance which we have to build this new energy system for the next 20, 30, 40 years and do justice to climate at the same time.
Thank you. I think that's a very daunting but also hopeful and optimistic note to end on. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the audience and also mention that there is a reception afterwards. So thank you again, and thank you for the conversation.
Thanks, Ben.